Happy September, welcome back to Bella's Books. It's so nice to have you here. Today I'm going to chat through all of the books I read in August 2022, give some thoughts on them and let you know what I've rated them, just so that you can see kind of what I've read in this month. Don't forget to like and subscribe before we get started, and I'll just jump right into it. So I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13 books this August. So first up we have A Brush with Love by Maisie Eddings. So this is a romance novel about a dental student called Harper and a love interest called Dan, who she meets through school. Harper really struggles with anxiety and panic attacks, and you kind of find out why that is throughout the course of the book. And Dan is kind of really there and supports her, and eventually she kind of learns how to be there for him and support him during his life as well. I enjoyed this book. It was kind of like a feel-good romance, I guess. There were some heavy topics in there about mental health and stuff like that. But the thing that kind of pushed me to rate this 3 stars was the fact that it was really predictable. There was nothing about this book that kind of shocked me, surprised me, drew me in, or kept me thinking about it afterwards. It just kind of happened, and with books like that, I might enjoy reading them, but I find them really difficult to kind of rate really highly. I then have Taylor Jenkins Reid's One True Loves, which is about high school sweethearts Emma and Jessie, who kind of chase adventure, travel around together. Emma's family kind of own a bookstore, and what she kind of wants to do is basically escape that. But then one day Jessie's helicopter goes missing mid-flight, and she kind of has to move back home, deal with all of that grief. And move forward with her life basically, until one day she gets a phone call from Jesse himself. So yeah, this is that book. I really liked this book. I feel like it kind of surprised me a little bit. The love story wasn't exactly what you might expect it to be, but at the same time it was really like relatable and understandable and seemed really logical. So the book seemed plausible even if the ending was a little bit surprising. I think I'd probably rate this a 3.5 stars because it's not quite a 4 stars for me because it doesn't have those kind of thought-provoking things in it, but it was an enjoyable read, and I think I did enjoy it more than A Brush with Love. I also read Working Hard, Hardly Working by Grace Beverley, How to Achieve More, Stress Less and Feel Fulfilled. So this is basically a really practical book about kind of being able to work hard but simultaneously manage your self-care, so kind of balancing self-care with productivity. I wanted to read this because I'm starting a PhD soon, and I felt like those kind of things are really important to figure out and to balance. I really enjoyed reading this book. I will definitely be rereading it because I feel like I can still get more out of it. But I took some notes while I was reading it, and it has some really helpful kind of tips and insights within it. I don't read a lot of self-help books, but I'd rate this a 4 stars simply because it's given me really practical things that I feel like I can implement into my everyday life. Now we have The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. This is a book about a woman named Catalina, and she kind of tells a lie. She lies that she has a date to her sister's wedding, and this lie spirals because she doesn't want to admit to her family that she is in fact single. So this book is enemies to lovers, and when Aaron, a colleague from work who she kind of despises, steps in, he kind of saves the day, and you know, maybe some romance blossoms. Who's to say? This book had me like gasping, smiling, like completely reacting visually as I was reading it. So I really did like it. It is an open door romance. It's not too bad, but if you don't want to read that kind of thing, there are a couple of scenes towards the end that you're probably going to want to skip. I also read Emily Henry's You and Me on Vacation, which is about Poppy and Alex who kind of spend however many years, I think 12 years, 12 summers, getting to know each other and their relationship changing. I liked the timeline of this book. It was a bit of a romance, but it wasn't my favourite thing ever. I'd say I'd rate it probably 3 stars, simply because it was a kind of fun beach read, but it's not necessarily the type of book that I'm going to go ahead and reread. Although, you know, when Emily Henry writes her next book, I'm definitely going to be picking that up to read on the beach on holiday next year. This is probably a 2.5, 3 stars from me. Now we've got Every Summer After by Carly Fortune. So this book is about a woman named Persephone who has spent the last 10 years living in a big city, away from her childhood and all of the people she knew during her childhood when she gets a call that sends her coming back to that place. And having to kind of confront her past, and she re-meets someone from her past called Sam, who she kind of built a relationship with over the course of 5 summers as like a teenager, young adult, and it's all about what happens to their relationships as they re-encounter each other as adults, and secrets which they've been kind of keeping from each other kind of come to surface. I loved this book. I cried. It felt very real. The characters are bad people, which I love. They make mistakes, they do things wrong, which makes it such an interesting book to read. I really would recommend you read this. There are kind of 2 timelines going on. There's one timeline which is just 1 weekend long, and then there's another timeline which is the timeline from when they were kids, which lasts about 5 years, I think, and you kind of get flashbacks, you get alternating scenes, but again, it's really neatly wrapped up and very easy to follow. I definitely rate this 4 stars. I don't think it's quite a 5-star read for me, but it might creep up to a 5-star over time. Yeah, maybe it's more fair to say that it's a 4.5. I then read Eva Carter's How to Save a Life, which is about a student named Kerry who saves the life of a footballer called Joelle, and about their lives over the next 20 years as they bump into each other, they meet each other, and what they end up doing. There's a lot of mention of kind of drugs, mental health, so I definitely look those up if those are things that you struggle with or you would prefer not to read about. I'm gonna rate this a 2 stars, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It's a very English kind of like 2000s book, which is when it's set, but I really didn't enjoy it. I felt it very difficult to identify with the characters. I don't know if that was just because I didn't understand where and when they've come from, but there was just something about the writing that made it feel very like almost boring to read about. Like, why would I care about these people? I didn't like any of the characters. They didn't have any redeeming qualities particularly. Okay, we now have Jojo Moyes' The Ship of Brides. Feels like ages ago that I read this, but yeah, it was at the very beginning of August. So the year is 1946, and all over the world, young women are crossing the seas in their thousands to meet the men that they married during wartime, to reunite with them. So in Sydney, 4 women join other brides and hundreds of officers on a voyage from Australia to England, a border ship called the Victoria. The men are all separated from the women, and everyone kind of heads over together. So this is about those 4 different women, the stories, their kind of loves, I guess. It very much gave a Titanic vibe. I'd say I'm probably going to rate it a 3 stars. It was a really good read, and I don't know if it's just because I've kind of recently fallen a little bit unenamoured with historical fiction. I didn't find myself racing to finish it, and I found the end a little bit predictable, but I'm still really glad that I read it. We have another Taylor Jenkins Reid book. We have Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this is about Daisy Jones and the Six, which is a fictional band from the 70s/80s, and they kind of get really big and then they all kind of split up, and this is set in an interview style and tells the story of the band and kind of what happened. I loved this book, and I think it's one of my favourites I've ever read. 4.5-star read. I love the interview style format of the book. I know that this book has kind of received some tension for being interview style, but I really liked it because I just felt like it was very compelling, it helped the book move really quickly, and you get a lot of different perspective, but I didn't find it confusing because obviously you always know who's speaking, and the way that Taylor Jenkins Reid really writes just keeps the story going, I guess. As I'm flicking through it, I want to read it again, which I feel like is always a good sign, so I definitely read this if you haven't already, although I'm sure most people have. Can you tell how much Taylor Jenkins Reid I've been reading recently? So we have Maybe in Another Life. So you'll see I actually reviewed this book recently. Feel free to go check that out. I reviewed it with my friend Georgia. The video is going to be linked somewhere, or you can just click on my channel and watch that video. So at 29, Hannah has no home, no career, and she moves back to Los Angeles to live with her friend Gabby. So they kind of go out to celebrate her homecoming at a bar, and at the end of the night, Hannah's ex-boyfriend asks her to leave with her, and then the story splits into two different realities, one where she leaves with him and one where she doesn't, and what happens as a consequence of those two parallel universes. I really enjoyed this book, but I didn't really like the ending. I didn't like how rushed Taylor Jenkins Reid made the ending of the book. There were kind of some big time jumps, and I just felt like it was a little bit unnecessary. She could have wrapped it up slightly more neatly, but I did enjoy it, and I'd probably rate it a 3 stars. I then read 8 Perfect Hours by Leah Lewis. So this is about Noelle and Sam, who kind of meet each other one snowy evening and spend 8 hours together, but then kind of never see each other again. They don't exchange any contact information or anything like that, but their lives do keep colliding. And so it's a little bit of one of those stories about fate, about destiny, and what I really liked about it is that you find out at the end there's kind of this big connection, this thing that's been tying them together, and I really didn't see that coming, so I really enjoyed reading about that and kind of being blindsided by it, and then that moment of realization as you go, oh wow. It's a very short book, that's what I will say, under 300 pages, and it also felt like a Christmas book. Like, I wish I'd read this in December, so I wouldn't say it's necessarily a beach read. I feel like it's more like a cozy, up by the fire type read, and I'd probably rate it 3 stars. It's worth a read, but not necessarily worth a reread. Next, we have The Heart Principle by Helen Huang. So this is about a violinist called Anna who meets a motorcycle riding tattooed man named Kwon. So they kind of attempt to have a one-night stand because Anna feels like she needs to get out there, but fail until they end up dating. So Anna is actually portrayed as autistic in this book and really struggles with that, and as a reader you kind of get to experience that struggle with her and see how it impacts her life and her relationship with her family and also Kwon. I really enjoyed this book. I'd say it's probably a 3.5 for me. I definitely recommend it. The only thing with it is that it's one of those books where the romantic interest, Kwon, is way too perfect. He's just like unrealistically perfect, which is really fun to read, but I feel like if you have a character like that simple almost and imperfect and unflawed, it makes it difficult for that book to really rate any higher than a 3.5 because it's just too static. And finally, I have Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, which I also reviewed on my channel recently, so feel free to go give that a watch. And it's basically about 2 kids who meet in a hospital gaming room. So one of them is visiting their sister and one of them is actually hospitalized, and they kind of separate for a while and then reunite 8 years later, and they start making video games together. They rebond over their love of video games. So it's about them and their relationship, but it's not necessarily a romance or a love story, but it is about love and it is about friendship and it is about kind of found family and how your friends do become your family. This was a 4.5, if not a 5-star read for me. I really enjoyed it. Maybe not 5, but seriously like 4.75, and I definitely really recommend giving it a read. Even though it is really about video games, you don't have to feel like that's going to impact your ability to kind of enjoy the book, as it is still incredibly enjoyable if you don't know anything or that much about video games or the video game world itself. So anyways, those are all of the books I read this month. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you'd like to kind of see more. Let me know if there are any book recommendations that you have for me, because I would absolutely love to share more videos with you, and I would always love an idea. If you have any other thoughts about any of these books, let me know in the comments as well. I'd love to hear about what you rated the books and what you thought about them. But yeah, have a fantastic day and I will see you next time on Belle's Books.